Imagine a company with its own army, not a country, not a kingdom, not an ancient empire, a company. A company that could wage wars, collect taxes, control trade routes, influence kings, and decide the fate of millions of people. It began with ships, spices, tea, silk, and promises of profit. But over time, this company became something far more dangerous. It became an empire. And perhaps the most disturbing part is this: it did not conquer the world by accident. It followed the logic of money. Because when trade needs protection, it creates armies. When armies need funding, they require taxes. When taxes require control, commerce becomes government. And when profit becomes power, a company can begin to rule like a state. This is the story of the East India Company, the company that ruled the world. At the beginning, the East India Company looked like a business. Its goal seemed simple: buy goods in the East, sell them in the West, and make a profit. European markets were hungry for spices, silk, cotton, tea, porcelain, and luxury goods from Asia. These were not ordinary products. They were symbols of status, wealth, and global connection. A single ship returning from Asia could make investors rich. And in a world where empires were competing for control of trade routes, ocean commerce became one of the most profitable games on Earth. But there was a problem. Trade was never just about trade. Ships had to cross dangerous waters. Ports had to be secured. Rival companies had to be pushed out. Local rulers had to be negotiated with, pressured, or defeated. So the company needed protection. And protection required force. This was the first transformation. The East India Company was no longer just buying and selling goods. It was beginning to build power. The company received royal permission to trade overseas, but that permission was more than a business license. It gave the company privileges that ordinary merchants could never dream of. It could make agreements. It could build forts. It could defend its interests. It could use violence when necessary. At first, this seemed practical. After all, trade routes were dangerous. Competition was fierce. The oceans were filled with pirates, rival powers, and political instability. But slowly, the line between trade and conquest began to disappear. A trading post became a fortress. A fortress became a military base. A military base became a political center. And a political center became a form of government. This is how empire often grows. Not always through a grand plan. Sometimes it grows step by step, through small decisions that seem reasonable at the time. Protect the warehouse, secure the port, control the road, influence the ruler, collect the tax, command the army. And then one day, a company looks around and realizes it is no longer just part of the economy. It controls the economy. This is where the story becomes extraordinary. The East India Company did not simply hire guards. It built armies. Tens of thousands of soldiers served under its authority. Many of them were local Indian soldiers known as sepoys, commanded by European officers. And with this military power, the company could do what ordinary businesses cannot do. It could fight wars. It could defeat rulers. It could force political agreements. It could reshape entire regions. Imagine this in modern terms. Imagine a private corporation with its own military force, its own foreign policy, its own tax system, and its own territories. That is what the East India Company became. It was not just a company operating inside an empire. It became an empire inside a company. And once it had military power, profit changed meaning. Profit was no longer only earned through buying cheap and selling high. Profit could now be extracted through control, through land, through taxes, through monopoly, through political pressure, through military victory. Trade had become conquest, and conquest had become business. One of the most important turning points came in Bengal. Bengal was one of the richest regions in the world. Its textiles were famous, its agriculture was productive, its cities were connected to vast trade networks. For a company hungry for profit, Bengal was not just a market, it was a prize. After military victory and political manipulation, the East India Company gained enormous influence over Bengal. But the real power came when it gained the right to collect revenue. This changed everything. A trading company had become a tax collector. That may sound like a small administrative detail, but it was the moment the company stopped acting like a merchant and started acting like a state. Because whoever collects taxes controls the foundation of power. Taxes fund armies. Taxes shape economies. Taxes decide who survives and who suffers. And when the purpose of taxation is not public welfare, but private profit, something dangerous happens. The people become a source of extraction. The land becomes a balance sheet. The economy becomes a machine designed to send wealth upward. This was not just capitalism. This was capitalism with an army. The East India Company created one of the most powerful extraction systems in history. Goods flowed outward. Money flowed upward. Power concentrated in fewer hands. Indian farmers, artisans, and merchants were pulled into a system they did not control. Local industries faced pressure. Taxes increased. Economic priorities shifted toward company profit. The company was not simply participating in the economy. It was redesigning the economy around itself. This is one of the most important lessons of the story. Markets do not exist in empty space. They depend on power. Who controls the ports? Who controls the roads? Who controls the currency? Who controls the courts? Who controls taxation? Who controls violence? The East India Company understood something that empires had understood for thousands of years. Wealth follows power. And once wealth begins to flow toward power, power becomes even stronger. It becomes a cycle. Money funds armies. Armies secure territory. Territory produces taxes. Taxes create more money. More money funds more armies. This cycle is how a company became a ruler. But behind every empire of profit, there are human lives. The East India Company's rule was not just a financial story. It was a human tragedy. When economic systems are designed mainly for extraction, ordinary people pay the price. Farmers face pressure. Workers lose bargaining power. Food systems become fragile. Local markets are distorted. And when crisis arrives, the poor suffer first. In Bengal, economic pressure, taxation, administrative failure, and environmental disaster contributed to catastrophe. Millions suffered. And while people struggled to survive, wealth continued to move through the system. This is the cold logic of extraction. The numbers may look efficient on paper. The profits may look impressive in London. The investors may celebrate rising returns. But far away from the boardrooms and ledgers, real people bear the cost. This is why the East India Company is not just a story about trade. It is a story about what happens when profit becomes detached from responsibility. When decision makers are far away from the suffering they create. When wealth can be extracted from a society without being accountable to that society. That is when business becomes empire. and empire becomes a machine. The East India Company was also a financial machine. It connected empire to investors. People in Britain could buy shares in a company that operated thousands of miles away. They did not need to see the battles. They did not need to see the taxes. They did not need to see the famine, the poverty, or the destroyed livelihoods. They only needed to see the returns. This created a dangerous distance between profit and consequence. The people who benefited from the system were often separated from the people who suffered under it. And this distance is one of the central problems of economic history. When profit is close but responsibility is far away, exploitation becomes easier to ignore. The East India Company showed the world how finance, trade, and empire could be connected. It was not just moving goods, it was moving risk. It was moving wealth. It was moving power from one side of the world to another. And the investors at the center of the system were not always thinking like rulers, they were thinking like shareholders. But that was exactly the problem. A state, at least in theory, must think about society. A company thinks about profit. So what happens when a company begins to govern society? The East India Company gave the world one of the clearest answers. Eventually, even the British state began to realize that the East India Company had become too powerful. This was the paradox. The company had expanded British influence. It had brought wealth, territory, and strategic advantage. But it had also become difficult to control. A private company was ruling vast lands and millions of people. It was making decisions with political consequences. It was creating scandals, crises, and moral outrage. And the question became unavoidable. Can a company be allowed to rule like a government? The British state slowly tightened control. The company's political power was reduced. And eventually, after rebellion and crisis, direct company rule in India came to an end. But the deeper idea did not disappear. Because the East India Company had already changed history. It showed that empire did not always need to wear a crown. Sometimes it could wear the face of commerce. Sometimes conquest could be written as a contract. Sometimes domination could be hidden inside trade. And sometimes the most powerful empire in the room was not a king, but a corporation. The East India Company is gone. Its ships are gone. Its armies are gone. Its forts are ruins. Its trading monopoly has disappeared. But the question it created is still alive. How much power should a company have? Today, corporations may not rule colonies with private armies, but some control data, communication, energy, finance, logistics, food supply chains, digital infrastructure, and even public opinion. Some companies are richer than nations. Some platforms influence elections. Some financial institutions can shake entire economies. Some supply chains decide whether prices rise or fall across continents. The tools have changed. The logic has not disappeared. Power still follows money. Money still seeks influence. Influence still shapes rules. And rules still decide who wins and who pays. That is why the story of the East India Company is not just an old chapter of colonial history. It is a warning. A warning that trade without limits can become domination. Profit without responsibility can become exploitation. And private power, when left unchecked, can begin to act like public authority. The world may have changed, but the question remains the same. When does a company stop being a business and become an empire? The East India Company began with trade, but trade created wealth. Wealth created influence. Influence created military power. Military power created political control. And political control created more wealth. This was not just a company growing bigger. It was a system feeding itself, a cycle of money, power, and empire, and that cycle shaped the modern world. Because the East India Company revealed something uncomfortable, empires are not always built only by soldiers. Sometimes they are built by merchants. Sometimes by investors, sometimes by contracts, monopolies, taxes, and balance sheets. The company did not simply sell goods, it sold the idea that profit could govern. And once that idea entered history, it never fully disappeared. So when we look at the modern world and ask why corporations have so much power, why markets influence governments, why profit can sometimes matter more than people, we are not asking a new question. We are asking an old one. One that began centuries ago when a company crossed the ocean in search of trade and returned with an empire. The East India Company disappeared, but the world it helped create is still with us. And maybe that is the most important lesson of all. Because the most dangerous empires are not always the ones that announce themselves. Sometimes they begin as business. If this story made you think differently about trade, empire, and corporate power, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to understand how money, power, and history shape the world we live in today, subscribe for more. Because history does not just tell us what happened. It shows us the patterns we are still living inside.